Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Eloisa Ramos, and I'm here with my friend Teresa. Hi, Teresa.
Hello.
And we are studying the Course of a Text in Miracles, studying Course in Miracles, the text. Reverse some of that. We left off on chapter 13. Let's see, chapter 13. The Guiltless World. And we are on section 2, the Guiltless Son of God. Okay, and just to review a little bit, the previous section was guiltlessness and invulnerability. So this is probably going to pick up here because vulnerability is weakness, and once we perceive ourselves as weak, we perceive ourselves as well, it brings up fear. That's what happens, is that we then make up a fearful world that can attack us and that can victimize us, precisely because we see ourselves as weak and vulnerable. And that's the result of guilt, which is not always very easy to see, but once we accept guilt, we have accepted that we have attacked or have done something to injure God or somebody else. And once we believe that, we will also believe that we can be attacked, because it's that belief is going to apply to others, but it's also going to apply to ourselves. So if we believe we can attack, we're going to believe that we can be attacked, and therefore that we are vulnerable and weak. And there is fear. That's how we make fear. Okay, so let's start with chapter 13, section 2, the Guiltless Son of God. Paragraph 1. The ultimate purpose of projection is always to get rid of guilt. Yet characteristically, the ego attempts to get rid of guilt from its viewpoint only. For much as the ego wants to retain guilt, you find it intolerable, since guilt stands in the way of your remembering God, whose pull is so strong that you cannot resist it. On this issue, then, the deepest split of all occurs. For if you are to retain guilt, as the ego insists, you cannot be you. Only by persuading you that it is you could the ego possibly induce you to project guilt and thereby keep it in your mind. Okay. Okay, let's just do line by line. So, okay, so guilt is basically intolerable, and it's intolerable precisely because it brings up fear. It brings up fear of being vulnerable to attack, of being weak. Okay, and it brings up fear of revenge, obviously, because if we think we're guilty, then we must have done something bad, and now it's an eye for an eye kind of thing. We're just waiting for the other, for the person we've attacked to attack us or get us back or get even, or, that was, yeah. So projection is how we think we can get rid of guilt, by seeing it outside and making someone else guilty. And and this is an ego attempt to get rid of it. Now, the ego can't really get rid of it because it depends on it to witness to the belief in separation, which is what the ego is. So in order for the ego to have any sense of reality in our mind, there has to be guilt. There has to be some guilt there. Otherwise, there would be no evidence to believe that we are separate and that we accomplish the separation from God, or, our brothers. And that's what it's saying here, is that guilt stands in the way of us remembering God, because it places this wall of fear there, that we don't look past, that keeps us believing that we are guilty, and that God's going to punish us for our guilt. So however, the remembrance of God is really the remembrance of love and happiness and joy and peace, and that has a very strong pull on us. I mean, we obviously look for all those things in the world where they can't be found, but it's precisely because they have such a strong pull on us that we seek for them in the world. Okay, so the split then is that in order to retain the guilt, the you cannot be you. So the you cannot still be the same Son of God that God created. It has to be a you that is no longer how God created us. It has to be a self that is, well, sinful. If we're guilty, then we've done something bad. So we're sinful, and we are no longer as God created us, as love, as unconditional love. So only by persuading you that it is you. Okay. So what the ego does is it persuades us that ego, is us, that we are our belief in separation as a separated individual self. That is an ego. And therefore, as the ego, we would want to project the guilt to be able to retain it, but think that we actually have gotten rid of it. And that's how we keep it in the mind. That's how we protect the guilt, by projecting it and seeing it separate and outside of us when it's really inside. So projection doesn't actually get rid of it. It's an appearance of getting rid of it. Okay. Okay. Any questions? Anything, Teresa? No. Okay. Number 2.
Yet consider how strange a solution the ego's arrangement is. You project guilt to get rid of it, but you are actually merely concealing it. You do experience the guilt, but you have no idea why. On the contrary, you associate it with a weird assortment of ego ideals, which the ego claims you have failed. Yet, you have no idea that you are failing the Son of God by seeing him as guilty. Believing you are no longer you, you do not realize that you are failing yourself. I mean, this actually, I think you already said this. We project the ego project the guilt to get rid of it, but we're actually merely concealing it. And this is what the ego does in order to survive. And at the end of it all, we don't even realize who we are. We think we're the ego.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, it expands a little bit in line 3. You do experience the guilt. And that's the thing about guilt, is that we have no idea why. Okay. Because we think, oh, hey, I'm seeing it outside, so I must be innocent. but I'm still experiencing the guilt. So then we associate it with this weird assortment of ego ideals, which the ego claims you have failed. So then what we do is we think, oh, you know what? I feel guilty because I failed to achieve my goals, or I failed my partner. I didn't meet the standards that I set for myself, or or maybe I was a bad daughter. I didn't get approval from my mother. I didn't meet her standards, or my father. So, this is kind of the weird assortment of ego ideals that it's talking about, is that we set up standards by which we judge ourselves as having hit the mark or not hit the mark, and therefore failed, come short. Let's see, been the cause of someone's disappointment, or feeling hurt, or being let down because they had expectations for us that we didn't meet, things like that. Yes, and that's all a big distraction, because what we're really failing here is ourselves as the Son of God, because we're seeing ourselves as guilty, which is not true. So that's what the line 6 says. Believing you are no longer you do not realize that you are failing yourself. Yeah. Okay, number 3. The darkest of your hidden cornerstones holds your belief in guilt from your awareness. For in that dark and secret place is the realization that you have betrayed God's Son by condemning him to death. You do not even suspect this murderous but insane idea lies hidden there. For the ego's destructive urge is so intense that nothing short of the crucifixion of God's Son can ultimately satisfy it. It does not know who the Son of God is because it is blind. Yet let it perceive guiltlessness anywhere, and it will try to destroy it because it is afraid. Okay, so we've hidden this belief in our guilt from our awareness pretty well, and so that dark and secret place is holding this belief that we have betrayed the Son of God by condemning him to death. Now, that can show up obviously symbolically, in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, where we would be believing that we are sinners and that he died for our sins. So therefore, we are the cause that condemned him to death. So that would be symbolically looking at it. But what we're really saying is that we have betrayed ourselves as the Son of God. And by no longer being who we are, because that's what the ego says, we have basically left eternity and now have become something that is subject to death, a body or a personality or something, So let's see, you do not even suspect this murderous but insane idea lies hidden here. So the ego is so intense that nothing short of the, yes. So there's a lot of unconscious, repressed stuff that we don't look at. Because it's scary when we believe that it's true that we are the ego, and that we are, that we have this destructive urge. So it becomes really fearful when we start looking at our, unconscious thoughts and all of that, is this fear that those are really, that's really what we are, that we are this ego that has this destructive urge. And so, because, there's times when we get really, really angry, or maybe there's rage or hatred, and you can tune into, some of that. And that can be quite scary to see that that's in there. So the last thing you want to do is go looking in there. Um, uh, and that's also a way to protect these false ideas from the light that would dispel them, which is the Holy Spirit. So let's see, does not know who the Son of God is because it is blind. Yes. So the ego cannot know who we are truly as the Son of God, because the ego represents a belief that what the Son of God is something that can change, obviously, because the ego thinks that eternity can become not eternity. That's why, the ego thought system is a belief in death. And of course, that's not true, because what's eternal is eternal, period. Okay. It means that there is no death. Let's see. But if it perceives guiltlessness anywhere, it will try to destroy it because it is afraid. So basically, the perception of innocence, which is the Holy Spirit perception, is something that really freaks our ego out. And so what happens is that if we project guilt and we do the practice of forgiveness, sometimes we can, let's see, not fully forgive, because we're actually afraid that if we let go of blaming someone else, we're just going to turn it on ourselves, and we're going to then attack and condemn ourselves. And so that's sort of what, the ego wants to have this veil of fear there, because that's how it keeps us from recognizing that that's the truth, that we are guiltless as a son of God. And what it means is it will try to destroy it. It just means that it will be in disbelief. What it means is that it will have a hard time accepting that, say, for example, someone in politics can actually be honest and not corrupt like itself. Do you see what I'm saying? So he will have to try to invent and try to look for evidence of wrongdoing and corruption. So the whole focus when we're identified with the ego is we tend to notice only what is wrong in people and in the world and in ourselves. Well, not so much in ourselves, because we're projecting, but we're very, very good at seeing what everyone else is doing wrong. And even if it's not wrong, we kind of make it up. We imagine it's wrong because we don't really know. We're just interpreting behavior, So like, oh, I see that so-and-so came out of so-and-so's house, and, what were they doing there? And, da 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 da. And so maybe then the imagination just goes, wild, and then you start believing it. You start believing all these wild imaginings that are not based in fact at all. But, yeah. Okay, number 4.
Much of the ego's strange behavior is directly attributable to its definition of guilt. To the ego, the guiltless are guilty. Those who do not attack are its enemies, because by not valuing its interpretation of salvation, they are in an excellent position to let it go. They have approached the darkest and deepest cornerstone in the ego's foundation. And while the ego can withstand your raising all else to question, it guards this one secret with its life, for its existence depends on keeping this secret. So it is this secret that we must look upon, for the ego cannot protect you against truth, and in its presence, the ego is dispelled. Wow. So ego has condemned the guiltless, which is, of course, the Son of God, and will continue to attack and will continue to protect, and it's a vicious cycle. Because it wants to keep us from the truth. The truth will cause it to die.
That's what the ego believes. Of course, the ego, there
Well,
is
it
no
kind of is
death.
true, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Well, yeah, but remember that the ego is not real. I mean, death
True.
is not real either. I just made it up. So that's the story. Yeah. Um, so the truth doesn't cause anything to die. I just want to, I just want to clarify so that there's no
I
fear.
appreciate that.
Because can be already very afraid of the truth, because it's as if admitting to the truth would make us guilty. See, it's almost like what it's saying here, like line 2, to the ego, the guiltless are guilty. So in other words, to actually believe that guilt is not real is to disbelieve everything that the world is basically saying to us, because we made the world to reflect the belief in separation. Okay. And therefore, it reflects back sin and attack and guilt. And so to go to the place where we begin to recognize, okay, there is actually no guilt. It's, we're making it up here. Our judgments are just making it up. There can be a sense of going against majority view or against, how I was raised. So there can be a sense of, oh, I'm opposing the status quo, almost like. And for a lot of us, the status quo is what we use to judge ourselves right or wrong. You see what I'm saying? And then we've made judging ourselves wrong as sinful, as guilty. So if what my parents say is the status quo of what truth is, okay, if I go against that, and if my parents believe in condemnation and guilt, and I go against that, then I'm going to believe that I'm actually guilty for being guiltless. I don't know if that made any sense, but yeah. So yeah, those who do not attack are its quote unquote enemies, you see. So it's a little bit like when we, the court, one of the lessons in the course says, in my defenselessness, my safety lies. Well, most of us grew up and, we accepted that defense is safety, that you have to protect yourself, and that protection is safety, and so you have to defend yourself, and that means you have to attack, okay, if someone attacks you. So now to say, well, wait a minute, I'm having to turn that around. So that would mean now that to not attack, okay, which to the ego is a form of weakness, okay, would be to not be strong, and that would be a let's see, and therefore the ego would look down on that, because that would be what's the word, a lowering of self, a lowering of image, of strength. Okay, now obviously the strength and the weakness is backwards for the ego too, because love is strength, but to the ego, attack is strength. So and to believe anything different than the ego would be to be its enemy, because we would not be valuing its interpretation of salvation, which is attack. Okay, and remember that what we value, we believe. So if we stop valuing the ego's interpretation, we're going to stop believing in it, and then we're in a position to let it go. Okay. Okay, number 5. Let's see. In the calm light of truth, let us recognize that you believe you have crucified God's Son. You have not admitted to this quote unquote terrible secret because you would still wish to crucify him if you could find him. Yet the wish has hidden him from you because it is very fearful, and so you are afraid to find him. You have handled this wish to kill yourself by not knowing who you are and identifying with something else. You have projected guilt blindly and indiscriminately, but you have not uncovered its source. For the ego does want to kill you, and if you identify with it, you must believe its goal is yours. Okay. Okay, so in the calm light of truth, let us recognize that you believe you have crucified God's Son. Okay, and this is the you here that is identified with the ego. Okay, so the self that is identified with being an ego separate from God believes that it has crucified God's Son. Because it believes that it can attack his brother and also himself, cause injury to himself and to others. So crucified, make others suffer and hurt. Okay, so okay, so to admit to this quote unquote terrible secret, you have not admitted to this secret because you would still wish to crucify him if you could find him. Okay, so that follows from what we were saying up here, that that the ego considers those that do not attack as enemies. Okay, so so the Son of God would be the self that does not attack. Okay, because it is love, it is unconditional love. So so this self, the ego, would still want to crucify if it could find him, because remember that the ego, the last thing the ego wants is let's see, where was that? That the guilt, to attack the guiltless. Let's see, right here, paragraph 4. To the ego, the guiltless are guilty. That's why it would still, if it could find the Son of God, want to crucify him. Okay, because the Son of God is guiltless. Okay, so so you have handled this wish to kill yourself, meaning to kill, meaning the ego's wish to kill the Son of God. Okay, by not knowing who you are. Okay, so when we identify with the ego, we're going to forget that we are the Son of God and guiltless. And we have identified with something else. We have identified with the ego, and then we can also identify with the body, which is also something else. So you have projected guilt blindly and indiscriminately. Yes, but you have not uncovered its source. Okay, for the ego does want to kill you. Okay, and if you identify with it, you must believe its goals are yours. So the ego wants to kill the you that is guiltless. Okay, because it considers that an enemy. Because it would be the end of separation. Guiltlessness is the end of the ego, of the belief in separation. So now, if you identify with it, if we identify with the ego, okay, we are going to believe that we want to kill ourselves, that goal is our goal, and that we would want to kill the Son of God, or that we would want to kill our own innocence or guiltlessness. That's what we would end up believing if we identify with the ego. Is that pretty clear, Teresa? I know it's sort of...
Yes, I think it is. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Number 6.
I have said that the crucifixion is the symbol of the ego. When it was confronted with the real guiltlessness of God's Son, it did attempt to kill him. And the reason it gave was that guiltlessness is blasphemous to God. To the ego is God. And guiltlessness must be interpreted as the final guilt that fully justifies murder. You do not yet understand that any fear you may experience in connection with this course stems ultimately from this interpretation. But if you will consider your reactions to it, you will become increasingly convinced that this is so. Wow. So really, when we look at what's said in the Bible, it's real or symbolic. It's still the truth, isn't it? That the ego did kill the Son of God.
Well, it attempted to kill
Yeah.
the Son of God.
Well, it's not possible, but
Yeah.
it's true. But it killed the body. Yeah. And this ego sees itself as God.
Yes. So
And justified in murdering.
yeah, so it's completely insane. It's completely upside down, you see.
Yes, because if it believes that it's justified in murdering itself or others, then it will be afraid that it's going to be murdered by itself or others.
Yes. Let's see. So 3, to the ego is God, and guiltlessness must be interpreted as the final guilt. Okay. So you see how it flips it, completely flips it. So now guiltlessness is guilt. Okay. And it justifies murder. So yeah, I mean, you can't say that's not insanity. That's pretty much insanity. So you do not understand that any fear you may experience in connection with this course, okay, is ultimately from this interpretation, because the course is teaching that the Son of God is guiltless. Okay, and if there's any fear, we have any fear around this course, it's ultimately because we have been accepting the ego's idea. By identifying with the ego, we have come to be afraid of guiltlessness, which is basically the fear of love. And there is a lot of resistance to reading this. I mean, everyone that reads it, will tell you how much resistance, not to everything, but to parts of it. And that's why it is important to pay attention to those parts where that resistance show up, our reactions, to notice our reactions to the parts that we're reading when we're studying the course, because that's going to give us feedback as to what beliefs we are still holding on to that are not true and that need healing. So, yeah. Okay, 7. Let's see. This course has explicitly stated that its goal for you is happiness and peace. Yet you are afraid of it. You have been told again and again that it will set you free. Yet you sometimes react as if it is trying to imprison you. You often dismiss it more readily than you dismiss the ego's thought system. To some extent, then, you must believe that by not learning the course, you are protecting yourself. And you do not realize that it is only your guiltlessness that can protect you. Okay. Yes. So the goal, is happiness and peace. Yes. So, Course in Miracles, through the practice of forgiveness, brings us to a place of happiness and peace. Okay, because it's an undoing of conflict and fear and guilt and sin. Okay, but if we're afraid of this, okay, we're afraid of healing the mind, okay, because we are protecting the ego self. That depends on guilt. And what that means is that we would rather be right about what we are as guilty than happy. So one of the real, let's see, a good way to approach, learning the course is to be open to being wrong about everything about everything. That makes learning the course a lot easier. The resistance is not so strong if we're just open-minded about the idea that everything that we have taught ourselves, we have learned in the world, hey, that could all be wrong, and if we really want happiness and peace, I think it's worth opening the mind to that possibility of having been wrong about everything. Okay, so we have to kind of look at that fear if we're afraid of it, and if it feels like we're being imprisoned by it. Yeah, because then there's still this sense of trying to protect that self that we believe we are, which is not true. And it makes a point here that it's only in guiltlessness, which is invulnerability, can you be protected. Okay, so number 8.
The atonement has always been interpreted as the release from guilt, and that this is correct if it is understood. Yet even when I interpret it for you, you may reject it and do not accept it for yourself. You have perhaps recognized the futility of the ego and its offerings, but though you do not want them, you may not yet look upon the alternative with gladness. In the extreme, you are afraid of redemption and you believe it will kill you. Make no mistake about the depth of this fear, for you believe that in the presence of truth, you might turn on yourself and destroy yourself. Wow. So God is offering us complete freedom, and we are so deeply afraid of it that we're afraid we're going to turn on ourselves and destroy ourselves.
Well, yes, because we're very, we can be very identified with our ego identity.
Bottom line, yeah.
Bottom line, and the ego does want to kill us. It's a death wish because to believe that we are no longer eternal means to believe that we are something that can die, and that we are a body that was born and is in time. And ultimately, everybody dies. So the idea of being born in time as a body in itself is a death wish, which is what the ego is, the belief in separation from eternity. So that we are no longer as God created us, but simply an impermanent object, like all the different objects in the world that come and go. And, that fear can really show up, for example, sometimes in depression when we have suicidal thoughts. Because there's a sense of loss there of ourselves that we've made. So there's a lot of grief and a lot of, futility. Like, oh, I have nothing to live for now. I've lost everything that I've, been invested in, that I've devoted my time, my energy, money, all of that. Yeah. And of course, we've invested in everything that's impermanent. So yes, we're going to lose it sooner or later. But it's because we have forgotten the truth of what we are as an eternal being of love, created by love that is eternal. So yeah, okay. Number 9. So let's see. Oh, okay. Let me just go back up here. The atonement has always been interpreted as the release from guilt. And this is correct if it is understood. So remember that the atonement is the recognition that the separation never happened. So if the separation never happened, we cannot be guilty of being the separate ego self. So it is the undoing of the identification with the ego. But we have to be willing to accept that we're not that ego that we think we are. So yeah, okay. Number 9. Let's see. Oh, so line 6. For you believe in the presence of truth, you might turn on yourself and destroy yourself. So paragraph 9. Little child, this is not so. Your quote unquote guilty secret is nothing. If you will but bring it to the light will dispel it. And then no dark cloud will remain between you and the remembrance of your Father. For you will remember his guiltless Son, who did not die, because he is immortal. And you will see that you were redeemed with him and have never been separated from him. In this understanding lies your remembering, for it is the recognition of love without fear. There will be great joy in heaven on your homecoming, and the joy will be yours. For the redeemed Son of Man is the guiltless Son of God, and to recognize him is your redemption. Okay, so Yeah, so it's about bringing this guilty secret to the light, for it to be dispelled, and therefore open the mind to remembrance, to the remembrance of the Father, and therefore the guiltlessness of the Son that we are, and who did not die because he's immortal. So, and line 5 is really it's really interesting here. In this understanding lies your remembering, for it is the recognition of love without fear. So in a world of duality, we tend to believe that both love and fear, that love and fear are opposites. And the remembering of the Son of God is to remember that love has no opposite. So it's the dispelling of all fear as illusion. Because remember that the ego thought system is a thought system based on fear. That's the foundation. And that's the foundation that keeps us sort of split, keeps the mind split, and therefore we don't, it blocks that it blocks us from looking at that quote unquote guilty secret, which is nothing. So as long as we think it's there and don't look at it, it's as if it is there for us because we're afraid it's true. Okay, but it's not really there. And if we were willing to go there and look at it and give it to the Holy Spirit, we would recognize our innocence and the innocence of everyone else. And that's why, you know, the Course says that, let's see, that it is a training course for removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. It's not teaching us the meaning of love, but it is teaching us how to remove the blocks, which is the fear. And let's see, so that we can let's see, bring the light, so that we can bring the guilty bring the guilty thoughts to the light so they can be dispelled. What we're doing is we're basically opening the mind so that the darkness in our mind can be dispelled. So yeah, and that's the process of recognizing the truth of the guiltlessness of the Son of God, which is what we are. And there will be great joy in heaven in your homecoming, and the joy will be yours. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Okay, that's the Guiltless Son of God. The next section is the fear of redemption. Okay, so that kind of follows from what we were reading here. It kind of touched a little bit on that in the, you know, the paragraphs. So we'll look forward to reading that. Any questions before we go, Teresa? No? Okay. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining, and until next time, bye.